You should have taken better care of yourself, Ethan.
I never forgot the sound of my own heartbeat, not the soft, rhythmic thump of life, but the violent, panicked pounding of survival. It was the only sound in the room when my brother leaned over me and whispered, "You should have taken better care of yourself, Ethan." The heart monitor screamed. My chest felt like someone had cracked it open and stuffed fire inside. I tried to speak, to ask why he was smiling, but all that came out was a strangled gasp. Damien just stood there, immaculate in his suit, the smell of expensive cologne choking the sterile hospital air. "You know," he said quietly, eyes cold, "you always expected me to save you. Maybe this time, you'll learn what it costs to depend on someone." Then he turned and walked out. The door hissed shut, the fluorescent light buzzed, and for the first time in my life, I realized that dying isn't about pain, it's about silence. They called it dilated cardiomyopathy. A fancy phrase for a broken heart, literally. My heart muscle had stretched too thin, weakened to the point where one bad day could end me. The doctor's voice was calm, too calm. "You'll need surgery within 2 weeks, Ethan. Without it, your chances aren't good." He looked at me the way people look at dogs limping on the side of the road, pity wrapped in professionalism. $10,000. That was the price tag attached to my life. I remember sitting in my truck afterward, staring at the crumpled estimate in my hands. 10,000 might as well have been 10 million. The garage where I worked barely paid enough to cover rent, and my savings account looked like a bad joke. But I had one person I could ask, the same person who always told me, "We're family, Ethan. We take care of each other." My older brother, Damien Vale. His penthouse looked like a magazine ad for greed. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble counters, the faint echo of jazz humming from hidden speakers. Damien answered the door in a blazer that probably cost more than my car. His smile was perfect, rehearsed, the kind that photographs well but doesn't touch the eyes. Man, you look like hell. What's going on?" I swallowed hard, told him everything. The diagnosis. The timeline. The cost. When I finished, he didn't speak right away. He just poured himself a drink, ice clinking in the crystal glass like a countdown. Finally, he said, 10 grand, huh? Damn. That's rough. I waited. Then came the sigh, the one that sounded sympathetic but wasn't. "You know I would if I could, Ethan," he said. "But things are tight right now. The market's been rough. Couple of my investments tanked. You know how it is." He took a slow sip, eyes drifting to the skyline as if the city was more interesting than my impending death. I forced a smile. Yeah, I get it. Just thought I'd ask." He clapped my shoulder, the way a boss pats an employee he's about to fire. "Stay strong, little brother. You've always been a survivor." That was it. I walked out feeling lighter, not because I felt better, but because something inside me had been cut loose. Hope, maybe. 2 nights later, I was scrolling through my phone in the dark, trying not to think about my heart hammering in my chest. That's when I saw it. Damien's face, lit by yacht lights and champagne. His arm around a girl half his age, blonde, stunning, influencer perfect. The caption read, "Sometimes you meet someone who deserves the world, $25,000 well spent. Palm tree sparkles, hashtag Maldives bound, hashtag worth it." My thumb froze over the screen. My chest burned. $25,000. He'd told me he had nothing. That the market had been rough. That his investments tanked. I clicked her profile, public, of course. Her stories were a slideshow of luxury, plane tickets, hotel suites, a caption that made my stomach turn. "When your man says, pack a bag, we're going to paradise, kiss mark." My man. She didn't even know his last name. I dropped my phone. The sound echoed through the small apartment, louder than it should have been. I sat there, staring at the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst then and there. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the lie. The ease with which he'd said it. He could have saved me. He chose not to. That night, I didn't sleep. I thought about every time I'd defended him when people called him selfish. Every time I'd borrowed his hand-me-downs, fixed his car for free, helped him move into one of his $1,000,000 condos. I thought about our mother, before she died, her last words to me, "Take care of each other." And I thought about how Damien had looked at me when I asked for help like I was an inconvenience. By dawn, my hands were shaking not from fear, but from clarity. If he could spend $25,000 to impress a stranger, he could afford to pay for what he'd done to me. Not in money. In regret. The next morning, I called him. He didn't answer. I called again. Still nothing. So I drove to his office. Glass walls, chrome accents, a monument to ego. His receptionist gave me a rehearsed smile. "Mr. Vale's in a meeting." I waited. 2 hours. 3. Then I left. On the way home, an idea began to form, small, ugly, and perfect. Damien loved 2 things, money and image. Take those away, and what's left? I pulled over, grabbed my notebook, and started writing. Access his ego. Hit where he trusts. Make it look like opportunity. Take everything. That night, I created a new email, a new name, a new life. E. Varen, independent investor. I built fake social profiles, a company website with stock photos, even LinkedIn connections. It was amazing how easy it was to look rich when you weren't dying. The plan was simple. I'd build a story too good for Damien to resist, a crypto investment promising millions. And I'd feed it to him, piece by piece, until he was in too deep to crawl out. Revenge doesn't start with fire. It starts with patience. As days passed, I found myself watching Damien's life unfold online, the girl in the Maldives, the champagne dinners, the hollow smiles. My condition worsened. Some nights I could barely breathe. But every time I felt my heart seize, I reminded myself, he could have stopped this. I spent my nights coding fake dashboards, fake trades, fake returns, enough to convince anyone greedy enough to stop asking questions. By the end of the week, E. Varen had a digital empire. By the end of the month, Damien would walk straight into it. But before that could happen, I needed to face him again, to look him in the eye and hear another lie. I called him one last time. This time, he picked up. "Ethan. Man, been crazy busy. What's up?" His voice was casual, like nothing had happened. "Just wanted to say thanks," I said, keeping my tone even. "For what?" "For teaching me that sometimes you gotta save yourself." He laughed. "That's the spirit. I always knew you'd tough it out." "Yeah," I said quietly. "You were right about one thing." "Oh yeah? What's that?" "You do always get what you deserve." He chuckled. "Ha! Damn right." He didn't hear the steel in my voice when I whispered. "Not yet." By the end of the week, Damien received an invitation in his inbox. E. Varen Investment Group invites you to an exclusive pre-launch opportunity. The moment I saw his company email register on my analytics dashboard, I knew. He'd taken the bait. My heart monitor beeped softly in the background as I lay in bed, pale and sweating. But I smiled. He had no idea the man he was about to partner with was the brother he left to die. And this time, I wasn't asking for his help. I was taking it. When people picture revenge, they think of rage, of fists, fire, gunshots. They never think about spreadsheets, code, and patience. For me, revenge began with Wi-Fi. I spent the next week wired to caffeine and adrenaline, hunched over my laptop like it was a life support machine. Because, in a way, it was. If my heart was going to stop, it wouldn't be before I finished this. The company I invented, Varen Capital, looked immaculate. A logo that gleamed like money. Fake press releases about blockchain asset diversification. Even a made-up advisory board populated by AI-generated faces that looked expensive. I bought a domain, registered shell LLCs through an online portal, and populated every page with the smell of success. Within 3 days, Varen Capital looked more legitimate than half the startups in Manhattan. Then I set up The Hook, a confidential white paper describing an early-stage decentralized energy market, the kind of crypto pitch that makes greedy men drool. All I needed was Damien to bite. He did faster than I expected. 3 days after the invitation email, a message pinged my inbox. From Damien Vale. Subject, Potential Partnership Inquiry. Mr. Varen. I'm interested in learning more about your project. Perhaps we can schedule a call. D. Vale. My hands trembled, not from illness this time but from thrill. I stared at his signature, D. Vale, CEO, Vale Enterprises. The same letters that had once signed my birthday cards. I composed my reply carefully, typing with the precision of a surgeon. Mr. Vale. Our pre-launch round is reserved for accredited investors only. However, we make exceptions for strategic partners. Attached is a preliminary overview. Discretion is paramount. E. Varen, Managing Director. Discretion is paramount. That phrase alone was catnip to a man like Damien. 2 days later, we had our first call. I disguised my voice through software, pitched it lower, smoother. Mr. Vale, I said, a pleasure to finally connect. Likewise, Damien answered, his confidence seeping through the speaker. He couldn't see me, lying on my bed with heart monitors blinking like city lights. He only heard success. So, he said, how soon can we get in? Depends on how serious you are. He laughed. Let's say I'm very serious. Of course he was. The same greed that made him lie to me was now my ally. Over the next week we spoke daily. He told me about his company, his ambitions, his frustration with small-minded investors. I listened, played the role of visionary entrepreneur, and sent him just enough fabricated data to keep him hooked. Each call drained me physically but filled me mentally. Every time I hung up, I'd cough until I tasted blood, but I'd smile through it. Because every breath was a step closer to payback. Halfway through the scheme, something unexpected happened. The girl from the Maldives, her name was Laura King, started messaging me. Not as Ethan, of course. As E. Varen. Apparently, Damien had bragged about his new business partner, and Laura, ever the opportunist, wanted in. Hi Mr. Varen, Damien says you're the future of finance. Winking face. Mind if I pick your brain? I stared at her message for a long time, thinking about that photo of her kissing my brother under the yacht lights. Part of me wanted to ignore her. Another part saw an opening. Happy to chat, I wrote back. Transparency builds trust. Over the next few days she became an unintentional spy. Every conversation she had with Damien found its way to me through her casual gossip. She told me about his insecurities, his financial overextensions, his temper. She told me enough to know exactly where to hit him. By the third week, Damien was obsessed. He wanted in on Varen Capital's Series A. He bragged about it to his board, his girlfriend, even posted a vague teaser on his socials. Something big coming. Disruption ahead. Perfect. I sent him the investment documents, 30 pages of legal jargon and clauses that would quietly transfer control of several of his personal assets to Varen Holding LLC. All fake, but real enough for the banks to process temporarily before the trap shut. When he asked about due diligence, I said smoothly, confidentiality is our foundation. Short-term NDAs protect both sides. He didn't question it. He never questioned anything that promised profit. Greed makes men deaf. Meanwhile, my own body was cracking. The nights were the worst, sharp pain, breath coming in stutters. I kept a defibrillator packed by the bed and told myself I'd get the surgery once this was over. Sometimes I'd record myself, just in case. My name is Ethan Vale, if anyone finds this. Then I'd delete the file. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted justice. Still, there were moments when I'd see an old photo of us, me and Damien as kids, building go-karts from scrap, and my anger would flicker into something sadder. But then I'd remember the yacht, the caption, the $25,000, and the pity would burn away. 2 weeks after our first call, Damien invited Mr. Varen to a private dinner to finalize the deal. I almost said no, it was risky, but the chance to look him in the eyes again was too tempting. I rented a gray suit from a consignment shop, slicked back my hair, and used makeup to disguise the hollowness in my cheeks. No one would connect the dying mechanic with the confident investor. The restaurant glowed in golden light. Damien stood as I approached, hand extended, smile polished. Mr. Varen. Pleasure at last. I shook his hand, steadying my breath. Likewise. We ordered wine. I didn't drink, my pills wouldn't allow it. He didn't notice. He launched into his usual charm, stories of success, vision, and false humility. Then, with practiced sincerity, he said, "You know, you remind me of my brother." Smart guy. Bit too emotional, but heart of gold. I nearly laughed. Heart of gold. Heart of steel bolts and scar tissue, more like. What happened to him? I asked lightly. He shrugged. Got sick. Always thought I'd help him out, but people have to take responsibility, you know? Of course, I said, smiling thinly. Responsibility's everything. He signed the documents that night, his signature flowing across the page like a confession. When I left, the city air felt colder, cleaner. The trap was set. It began quietly, bank alerts, legal inquiries, transactions flagged. Varen Holdings started liquidating Damien's side of the investment. Accounts froze. Suppliers panicked. Investors called. Within 48 hours, half his company's liquidity vanished into the fake shell I'd built. By the time he realized Varen wasn't answering calls, the only thing he could do was scramble. From my apartment, I watched the headlines unfold on finance blogs. Vale Enterprises faces sudden cash flow crisis. Anonymous startup drains assets amid crypto dispute. Each article was a pulse in my chest, steady, satisfying. But revenge, I was learning, isn't a straight line. It's a circle. The more it tightens, the less air you have. Lara showed up at my garage one afternoon, unannounced. I almost didn't recognize her without the filters, realer, smaller, nervous. "Ethan," she said, twisting her purse strap. "Can we talk? How'd you find me?" "Your brother's losing it. He thinks someone's targeting him. He said it might be you." I smiled faintly. "Did he?" "He's different," she whispered. Scared. I've never seen him like that. For a second, I almost felt bad. Then I remembered how he'd watched me drown in debt, in fear, in pain, and how he'd smiled while doing it. "He should be," I said simply. She bit her lip. Are you going to hurt him?" I looked at the grease under my fingernails, the calluses on my palms. "I already have." That night, Damien finally called me Ethan, not Varen. His voice was raw, panicked. "Ethan. You've got to help me. Everything's falling apart, someone's stealing from me." I almost laughed at the irony. "I'm sure they had their reasons," I said quietly. He didn't notice the tone. "Please, man. You're good with systems, right? Maybe you can trace it." "Sure," I said. "Send me the files." He did. And as I opened them, I realized the final step was close. He'd handed me his empire passwords, accounts, the keys to the kingdom. Revenge wasn't a flame anymore. It was precision surgery. While the world watched Damien's downfall, I returned to the hospital for a checkup. My doctor frowned at the charts. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Ethan. You need that surgery now." "I will," I promised. "Soon." He didn't believe me. Neither did I. Back home, I rewatched the hospital security footage from that day, the one where Damien told me I should have taken better care of myself. It replayed in my mind like a prophecy. Now he was the one who should have taken better care. When Damien finally realized who Varen was, he stormed into my apartment. He didn't knock, he just burst in, red-eyed, furious, unshaven. "Ethan. What the hell did you do? I didn't look up from my computer. Closed the circle. You ruined me. My investors pulled out, the banks froze everything. You spent 25 grand on a girl you met at a party, I interrupted. 10 could have saved your brother. Remember that? His mouth opened, but no words came. He stepped closer, trembling. You're sick. I said, standing slowly. But revenge is surprisingly therapeutic. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick with everything we'd never said. Finally, he whispered, "You wanted to destroy me." "No," I said. "I wanted you to feel what I felt, helpless." He sank into a chair, face in his hands. For the first time, Damien Vale looked small. When he left, I didn't feel triumph. I felt empty. Because revenge, I realized, doesn't cure anything, it just evens the score. That night, my heart gave out again. I collapsed beside the desk, gasping. In the distance, an ambulance wailed. The same silence from 10 days before swallowed me whole. I woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed, tubes everywhere, machines humming. But I was alive. Barely. A nurse told me the surgery had been arranged, paid for anonymously. I didn't have to guess who. It wasn't Damien. It was Lara. She'd sold her designer bags, her car, everything, to cover the cost. Maybe guilt is contagious. I recovered slowly. Outside, Damien's company imploded. Lawsuits, investigations, the works. He didn't go to prison, he was too slippery for that, but he lost everything that mattered to him. He tried visiting me once. I watched him through the glass window of my hospital room, bouquet in hand, eyes hollow. I turned away. Some debts don't get collected in dollars. Months later, when I finally stepped outside again, the city looked different, smaller. My heart still beat irregularly, but it beat on its own. I walked past a newsstand and saw a headline. Former CEO Damien Vale sells assets, steps down. I smiled. Revenge hadn't saved me, but it had balanced something deep inside. And balance, I learned, is all a broken heart really needs. The surgeons called it a successful procedure. I called it a stay of execution. 3 weeks after the operation, my chest was a map of stitches and bruises. I could breathe again, but every breath reminded me of what it had cost to get here, not money, but blood, secrets, and the last pieces of my old life. Rehab was fluorescent and endless. Machines beeped, nurses hovered, and I learned to walk again with wires tugging at my ribs. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I'd see Damien sitting at my bedside the night he refused me, the drink sweating in his hand, the casual cruelty in his voice. Other times I saw him signing those fake documents, pen shaking, the first crack in his empire. Every memory was a stitch that hadn't healed. Lara visited once. She brought a small plant and guilt written across her face. "I didn't do it for him," she said. "I know," I answered. "You did it for you." She nodded, left the plant on the windowsill, and disappeared from my life as quietly as she'd entered it. From my hospital bed I watched the news unravel Damien's world. His company delisted. His properties repossessed. Reporters outside his condo shouting questions about fraudulent investments and internal sabotage. Every headline was a heartbeat, thump thump justice. But revenge is a slow poison. At night, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if I'd built my whole recovery on the same obsession that ruined him. If Damien was drowning in shame, I was treading water in bitterness. One afternoon he came. No entourage, no sunglasses, just Damien, in jeans and a wrinkled jacket, holding a paper bag from the hospital cafe. He looked older. Smaller. "Thought you might want something edible," he said, setting the bag down. I didn't answer. The smell of stale coffee filled the room. "I know you don't want to see me," he went on, "but I had to. I need to understand, why." I looked at him for a long time. "You already know why." "I made a mistake, Ethan." I laughed softly. "A mistake is forgetting a birthday. You left me to die." He swallowed hard, eyes glassy. I didn't think it was that bad. You never think it's that bad until it's you. Silence stretched between us. Finally he whispered, "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing," I said. "That's what you're best at." He left the bag. Inside was a sandwich and a folded check for $10,000. I tore it in half without looking at the amount. Rehab ended, freedom felt unfamiliar. I rented a small apartment across town, started picking up repair jobs again. My body worked slower, but it worked. Sometimes I'd see Damien on the news, now a consultant, talking about lessons learned. Other times I'd pass him on the street, both of us pretending not to notice. Once he stopped me outside a coffee shop. "You look good," he said. "So do you," I lied. "I meant it," he insisted. "I'm trying to be better." "Then start by never lying again," I said, stepping past him. He didn't follow. Weeks later, an envelope appeared under my door. No return address, just my name in his handwriting. Inside was a letter. "Ethan. I can't fix what I did, but I can make sure you never have to struggle again. The trust fund is in your name now. No strings attached. If you never want to speak to me again, I'll understand. D." I stared at it for hours. Then I went to the bank, transferred every cent to a children's heart charity, and mailed the receipt to his office with a single line. Some things can't be bought. Spring came. I fixed engines, paid rent, ate breakfast without pills sometimes. My heart still skipped beats, but now it was from life, not anger. One evening I drove to the ocean. The air smelled of salt and second chances. I thought about Mom, about her words, "Take care of each other." Maybe I'd failed that promise. Maybe keeping my distance was the only way to honor it now. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I'm proud of you. Take care of that new heart." I didn't need to ask who it was. I typed back. "I am. You should, too." Then I blocked the number. Months later, I caught a glimpse of him on a TV in a diner, Damien, giving a seminar on ethical investment. He looked healthy, polished, haunted. His eyes flicked to the camera for a second, as if he knew I might be watching. I switched the channel. Outside, engines roared, life moved, and my heart kept time with it, steady, imperfect, mine. He'll spend the rest of his life remembering the brother he could have saved. I'll spend mine remembering that I saved myself. The first thing I noticed when I started sleeping through the night again was silence. Not the hospital kind, not the anxious kind, real silence. The kind that belongs to people who have made peace with noise. I didn't know if I'd earned that peace, but I was learning to live in it. I went back to work full-time 2 months after rehab. The garage smelled the same oil, metal, and burnt coffee. The guys greeted me like I'd just come back from vacation. "Good to have you breathing, man," Marco said, handing me a wrench. Breathing. Such a simple word for a miracle. Customers came, cars went, bills got paid. Some days my chest ached, but it was the honest ache of muscles, not memory. Every so often I'd catch myself thinking about Damien's empire. How it had evaporated like steam from an exhaust. Then I'd shake it off and tighten another bolt. Fixing engines was easier than fixing ghosts. Word traveled even when I didn't want it to. People said Damien was consulting for non-profits, that he gave speeches about integrity. Others whispered that he was rebuilding, smaller, humbler. I never looked him up. But every time someone mentioned his name, a phantom pressure bloomed beneath my ribs. Guilt, maybe. Or residue. Late one evening I found another envelope taped to my door. No letter this time, just a single photo. It was us, maybe 8 or 9 years old, covered in mud, laughing beside the half-finished go-kart we'd built from junkyard scraps. On the back, in his handwriting. "We used to build things, not break them. D." I kept the photo on my fridge. Not forgiveness. Just remembrance. Sometimes I'd see him in passing, across a crosswalk, through a cafe window. We never spoke, but our eyes met once. He looked like a man carrying a house made of mirrors, every reflection showed a mistake. That night I dreamed I was back on the hospital gurney, alarms screaming, him leaning over me again. Only this time he whispered, "I'm sorry." When I woke, the dream left a strange peace behind, like a wound closing. Lara called out of nowhere. She was in another city, working in event marketing. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for not blaming me." "You never owed me anything," I told her. She laughed softly. "I think I did. You taught me what people look like when they stop pretending." We talked for a while about normal things, weather, jobs, rent. When we hung up, I realized it was the first truly ordinary conversation I'd had in years. It felt like recovery. A few months later, the Children's Heart charity I donated Damien's money to invited me to speak at a small fundraiser. I almost refused, public speaking wasn't my thing. But they insisted. So I told them the truth, edited, of course. How I'd been given a second chance, and how sometimes the people closest to you teach you the hardest lessons. When I finished, the applause was gentle, human. I could breathe through it. Afterward, the director shook my hand. "You turned pain into something that saves lives," she said. Maybe that was the first real victory. A year to the day after my surgery, I found Damien waiting outside the garage. He was thinner, dressed simply, no entourage. He looked like a man who'd learned how to carry his own bags. "Ethan," he said quietly. "Damien. I saw the interview you gave for the foundation." I frowned. "Didn't know you watched daytime TV." He half smiled. "I watch a lot of things these days." Silence stretched. Then he said, "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you." "Proud?" I echoed. "You made me this way." "I know," he said. "That's the worst part." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small, battered pocket knife. "The one we used to carve our initials in the old oak," he said. "Mom kept it. I thought you should have it." I took it. The metal was cold, familiar. He turned to leave. "Damien," I said. He stopped. "Don't waste the rest of your life trying to fix mine." He nodded once, eyes bright, and walked away. That night I sat on my balcony, the pocket knife in my palm, moonlight running along its edge. All debts had been paid, money, lies, revenge. But the emotional kind? Those never clear, they just stop accumulating interest. I realized I didn't hate him anymore. I just didn't need him anymore. That's the real cost of betrayal, not the loss of love, but the loss of need. Months blurred into a rhythm. Work, sleep, ocean drives on weekends. My heart scar faded from angry red to silver. Sometimes new customers recognized my name from the charity segment. "You're that guy who survived," they'd say. "Still surviving," I'd answer. Because survival, I learned, isn't an ending. It's a habit. 2 years later, a letter arrived from overseas. Postmark, Singapore. Inside. "Ethan. I've started over here. Teaching finance ethics at a university, of all things. Every lecture I tell them about the difference between profit and price. You don't have to reply. Just know that I finally understand what you tried to show me. Damien." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it behind the old photo on my fridge. Then I whispered, "Lesson learned." The next morning the sun rose over the city, catching on the chrome of half-fixed cars outside the garage. I turned the radio up, sang along, off-key and unashamed. My heart fluttered once, just a hiccup, and then steadied. For the first time, I didn't hear the echo of machines or the hum of revenge. Just life, rolling forward. He rebuilt his soul, I rebuilt my heart. Some debts are better left uncollected. 3 years after the surgery, I still checked my pulse sometimes. Not out of fear, habit. It reminded me that my body worked on its own now, no borrowed money, no borrowed mercy. The garage was mine. I'd bought it from the old owner with a grant from the foundation. Kids from the neighborhood hung around after school, learning how to fix engines instead of breaking into them. I kept a jar on the counter labeled Heart Fund. Every month we dropped in whatever tips we could spare. I liked the sound of coins more than applause. One Saturday the shop radio crackled with a business interview. And joining us from Singapore is former CEO Damien Vale, now a lecturer on corporate ethics. I froze, wrench halfway to the toolbox. His voice came through the static, measured, humble, almost quiet. "Success taught me nothing," he said. "Losing everything taught me how to listen." Someone turned up the volume. "If you could speak to the person you hurt most, what would you say?" "That I see him in every student who still thinks money buys meaning." I switched the radio off. Silence again, honest, necessary. Marco glanced over. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Just didn't like the song." 2 weeks later a letter came by registered mail. Embossed seal, university logo. Mr. Ethan Vale. Our ethics department would be honored if you joined us as guest speaker for an upcoming seminar on personal redemption. Invitation extended jointly by Professor Damien Vale. My hands stayed still on the envelope. For a long minute I listened to my own heartbeat, steady, defiant. Then I folded the letter neatly and wrote across the front, "Return to sender." Some stories don't need sequels. I drove to the coast that evening. The sea was rough, wind biting, the horizon the same dull gray as the day I almost died. But now it felt different, like the world owed me nothing and that was okay. I thought about what revenge had cost: time, sleep, parts of myself I'd never get back. And what it had bought: freedom. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just space to breathe. I tossed the pocket knife into the waves. The moon caught the metal for a heartbeat before it vanished. That felt like closure. Back home I opened a drawer filled with scraps of paper, half-written letters to Damien I'd never mailed. Some angry, some almost kind. I read one aloud. "You taught me that money measures nothing worth keeping. You also taught me how strong I am when I stop waiting for you to care." I burned the stack in an old coffee can on the balcony. The smoke rose, thin and clean, and for the first time in years I didn't cough. The foundation expanded. We opened a small clinic named the Vale Center for Cardiac Care. They wanted to name it after me alone, but I insisted on both our names. Not forgiveness, context. At the ribbon cutting, reporters asked why. "Because every heart has two sides," I said. "You need both to keep it beating." That line ended up in the papers. I didn't mind. It was true. Occasionally a postcard arrived from somewhere new: Berlin, Cape Town, Kyoto. Always the same handwriting, always unsigned. A single sentence each time. Still listening. Still learning. Still alive. I never replied, but I kept them in the same drawer where the letters had burned. Proof that some debts can be paid by silence. Years later, on an ordinary morning, I realized I'd gone an entire week without thinking about him. That's when I knew I'd finally healed. I walked outside, grease on my hands, sunlight on my scar, and the city felt wide open. A kid from the shop shouted, "Boss, you okay?" I smiled. Better than okay. The radio inside played softly, some old song about brothers in time. I let it play. He lives with regret, I live with rhythm. We both kept our hearts. That's the price of blood, paid in full.